Hello. Today I want to talk a little bit about final expense planning. This is going to be part of a series on final expense planning. We're going to get into the use of prepaid funeral plans, life insurance policies, and a few other topics, including the possibility of being able to pay for final expenses out of a retirement account like a 401k. But today, to kind of set the groundwork, we're going to talk just a little bit about final expenses and what that actually means and some numbers. So final expenses are going to be those costs that attend end-of-life events. The phrase might refer to any of a number of different things, but I'm going to focus on three particular things that it might refer to. The first one is going to be hospital and medical costs. The second is going to be funeral, burial, or crematory expenses. And the third is going to be attorney and court costs. So let's go through those briefly and just talk a little bit about each one. According to the Healthcare Cost and Utilization Project, approximately 1/3 of all deaths in the United States occur in a hospital setting. Associated expenses can range from $20,000 or more, with a median cost around $22,000 to $23,000. Funeral services are going on average to cost between about $7,000 and $10,000, and the median cost is around $8,500. Crematory services can run anywhere from about $1,000 all the way up to about $4,000. Depending on whether or not you go through a funeral home or whether you go through a crematory directly. If you add viewing, rental casket, you can expect to pay another $1,000 or $2,000 on top of the crematory costs. Caskets themselves can range from about $1,000 all the way up to $10,000, depending on if we're talking about a rental casket, how fancy a casket you want, and so on. Grave plots can cost anywhere from about $1,000 to $5,000. And opening and closing costs, meaning the actual cost of digging the hole in the ground and then shoveling the dirt back on top of it, can add on another couple hundred to $1,000 or more. Grave markers vary widely in cost, from simple flat stones or plaques to headstones, more traditional tombstones, or even very large monuments. And depending on which one is selected, it could be anywhere from a couple $100s to a couple $1,000, all the way up to tens of thousands of dollars for elaborate monuments. But for most people, we're going to be talking about anywhere from about $250 to a couple $1,000s for graveside markers. You should bear in mind with funeral home costs that some costs are declinable. You can select various different kinds of prayer cards or various kinds of announcements. You can have books laid out for people to sign, and these kinds of things are often optional. But there are going to be a few costs that are associated with a funeral home that are simply mandatory or non-declinable, and those are going to be things like handling the body, doing the embalming, paying the funeral service people for their time, and that kind of thing. Graveside markers, besides just the stones themselves, you may have to pay extra for engraving, that is to say, to have the decedent's personal information, date of birth, date of death, some kind of a thing added on to those. Maybe an additional cost. Graveside tents, graveside flowers, and other things that might accompany graveside service or burial are often going to be more again. Religious services are going to cost a couple of hundred, depending on the denomination or type of religion. What's involved may vary widely. But again, when we're talking just about averages, we're talking about $7,000 or $8,000 for a funeral home, maybe a couple of $1,000s more for the grave plot and the opening and that kind of thing. So for a total funeral expense, burial expense, might be talking around $10,000. Attorney's fees and court costs. This can be for settling an estate, it might be for probate, it might be for any number of other kinds of legal issues that surface. If we're talking about estate costs, lawyers might charge between $500 to a couple of $1,000s to settle an estate, depending on how complicated it is. Court filing and copying fees for necessary documentation can run a couple $100s by themselves, maybe up to $1,000. And complicated estates can cost tens of thousands of dollars if they have to go through an elaborate probate process, and sometimes probate process can take many months or even years. It's going to be the subject for another video on probate and on the desirability of trying to minimize or avoid court involvement in legacy and estate planning altogether if possible. But when we think just about expenses, we can expect that final expenses, all total, if we include hospital, funeral, burial, and attorney fees, can be anywhere from $25,000, $40,000, $50,000 or more for total final expense kinds of costs. Burial policies themselves may be between $8,000, $10,000, $15,000, and those might successfully discharge just whatever financial obligations attend the actual funeral, crematory, or burial costs. Life insurance can play an important role in settling up some of the estate costs and some of the final expenses that we have just discussed. Comparing funding options will be the subject of a couple of other videos. I'm going to go into the difference between prepaid funeral plans and life insurance policies, as well as I said again, as comparing the use of life insurance to, let's say, taking proceeds from a retirement fund. But for the present time, we have just surveyed some of the final expense costs that are averages or median costs in the United States. If you found something of use in this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for further information.